Welcome, everyone, to the Follow D Money podcast. And this week, my guest is Marion County Prosecutor Ryan Mears. I learned about this young man when he was running last year, 2 years ago?
Yeah.
Last year.
Yeah, last year.
For Marion County Prosecutors. You were on Jen Watt's podcast.
Yes.
I listened to that podcast, and I was pleasantly surprised to hear your viewpoints on things. And I think last year I thought about having you on, and I just never reached out. I met someone that worked with you, Ms. Schrock, and I approached her about it, and we made it happen. And I'm super happy that you're here. So thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me. I always love the opportunity to talk about what we have going on in the office and also connect with people who are doing great work in the community.
I appreciate that. First of all, can you explain what a prosecutor does, what a Marion County prosecutor does?
I think the biggest thing for us is we're looking for ways to help people. You know, we encounter a lot of people who are going through really difficult times, whether they're a victim, a witness, and even a defendant, someone who's accused of a crime. And for us, we're always looking for opportunities. How can we help these individuals get into a better place than what they were? Okay. And one of the things that we do that's probably a little bit different is, you know, when we encounter individuals, it can't just be about that idea of punishment. And there's no question punishment has to be part of the criminal justice system, but it also has to be about changing behavior. Yep. And we have to be mindful that there are people we're dealing with who have mental health issues, who have addiction issues, who have a variety of challenges, and just beating that person down some more doesn't always produce a better outcome or an outcome that's ultimately going to benefit the community. Yep. And so when I think about being a prosecutor, it's not about being tough. It's about being fair and make sure we treat everybody fairly. And then it's also about how can we help people get better.
Yeah. So as a prosecutor, you are responsible essentially for who goes to jail, right?
Yeah, I mean, we have the responsible for enforcing the criminal laws here in Marion County, which sometimes results on people going to jail. As I tell people, I wish I had as much power as people thought I did. Yeah. You know, I don't have a gun and a badge, so I'm not arresting anybody. Right. And I'm not a judge, so I can't sentence anybody. Yep. But at the end of the day, we understand that we play an integral role in the criminal justice system and will have input in terms of who's ends up going to the Department of Correction and who doesn't. Okay.
And as in your position, you're in the community and you affect the community with not the textbook definition, but what is your definition of community?
Well, for us, it's the people that we serve and the people that we interact with each and every single day. I think one of the most important things, if you're fortunate enough to be in a position of leadership, the way hopefully you approach things is you serve the community. The community doesn't serve you. And we talk about community, it's the people who need help. Yep. It's how can we improve this city? How can we help try to solve problems and put people in a better position than they otherwise would have been in? And, you know, that takes a variety of different forms. But for us, it's helping out our friends, our neighbors, and the people that my kids go to school with, the people that, you know, we buy groceries from. We're all related, especially in a city like Indianapolis. It's the smallest town really you could ever be in for a big city. Yep. And so that idea of community, I think, is even more important in a place like Indianapolis.
Okay. I come from Los Angeles. Like, that's where I'm from. That's where I was raised.
What part of L.A.?
South Central.
Okay.
Yeah. And
by USC?
South of USC. So okay. I lived off 135th in Vermont, which is about, if you take the freeway, it's about a 5-minute drive to USC. Okay. Right. Okay. But the community aspect of law enforcement and the relationship between the two, very important. How do you think that relationship can be fixed, manipulated, any way? Like, what is your plan to make the relationship between law enforcement and community better?
Well, the first thing is we have to acknowledge that the criminal justice system has failed the community And we have to be honest about the fact that the criminal justice system doesn't always produce outcomes that have benefited people, in particular communities of color.
Yeah.
And it's been by overt acts of racism. It's been by policy. It's been through implicit bias. It's been through all these different situations that have caused harm. And the first thing is we have to be willing to acknowledge that they exist.
Yep.
and that those errors have happened. And then that hopefully provides an opportunity to move forward. But, we meet a lot of people who have maybe been involved in the criminal justice system, who had a bad experience or who have a negative perception of the criminal justice system. And I think the one thing that we can do is try to build trust in that community every single day. Emily Schrock's here with me today, who heads up our Second Chance stuff. And we need to be able to say, this is what we did today to help people, not some hypothetical issue, not, hey, we're going to get to this. Today, this is how we helped and made a difference.
Yep.
And so we try to do that through our Second Chance fairs, where we help people get expungements, where we can get criminal convictions taken off people's records so they can get jobs, so they can find housing, because there's a huge problem with discrimination against people with criminal histories in Marion County.
Yep.
And we also work really hard to help people get their driver's license reinstated. I meet too many good people in our community whose license is suspended, not because they're bad drivers, but because they couldn't afford to pay a ticket.
Yep.
And then that $160 ticket becomes a suspension, which every time they're now driving, the state of Indiana says, you're a criminal. And it doesn't matter if they're going to work, church, school, picking up their kids, whatever, the law wants to criminalize them. And that just doesn't make any sense.
Yep.
And so we try to work through those issues to help people so they can move forward, because the one thing that I can tell you, I've been a prosecutor since 2006, been the elected prosecutor since 2019. If we get people working and we find housing for people, I don't see them in the criminal justice system.
Right.
So how can we help people get to that place? And a lot of times it's something as simple as a driver's license holding someone back.
Yep.
Or it's as simple as someone saying, how am I supposed to work on my addiction issues or my mental health issues if I don't know where I'm staying tonight?
Yep.
That's a fair point. So how can we address those challenges to help get that person moving in the right direction?
That sounds dope. And one problem that I see, not a problem, but one way to fix things is knowing what you think the community can do to help themselves in these situations. How do we as a community look at a prosecutor and like, what advice do you give to us to help you guys make all this easier?
Well, one of the things I'll tell people too is, when we do our Second Chance fairs, oftentimes we have lines around the building. Yep. I mean, we did one at Lucas Oil Stadium.
Dang.
And sold that place out.
Wow.
I think Emily's still recovering from it. She did all the work. I was just the one up there talking trash. But, in all seriousness, to me, it goes to demonstrate the number of people who want to get help.
Yep.
We just have to get them the resources.
Yep.
And we just have to give them the opportunities. And a lot of times you have to bring those opportunities to different areas in the community.
Yep.
And so a lot of it's just about awareness in terms of how can we help spread this message of these are the things that we're trying to do.
Yep.
I think the other thing, too, is we have to do a good job in terms of our conversations with the community of articulating what our priorities are. Our priority is violent crime. I don't care about marijuana. I've told people I'm not going to prosecute simple possession of marijuana because that's not a priority to us.
Yep.
And I think it's important for us to demonstrate to the community, these are our priorities. This is why these are our priorities. And then here are the programmings and the things that we can offer that will hopefully help people. There's a lot of systematic issues that a lot of people are dealing with, and it's more complicated or more complex than just the prosecutor's office.
Yep.
But if they can address one of those, if they can knock down one of those barriers, whether it's that prior felony that's keeping them from getting a job or that driver's license that's holding them back, you would be amazed the level of hope and confidence that gives someone to push forward to try to be able to do something different. We see it all the time at our Second Chance fairs. People are literally moved to tears because they have a driver's license for the first time in 10 years. Yeah. It seems simple to some people, but that's been this huge roadblock that's holding someone back, and then that gives them that confidence to move forward and apply for a job. And so a lot of it is about making sure that we're having meaningful conversations with people in the community and then taking that feedback and saying, okay, how can we fine-tune our process to have the biggest impact possible?
Yep. I think that when it comes to policing in communities, one of the biggest things is the ability to communicate with each other. sometimes we find that police officers are policing in areas that are not common to them. So you can't communicate, you don't understand the environment, so it's harder for you to enforce a law or even have sympathy for a person when you don't understand the laws of the land. And I just want to know your opinion about trying to find a way to get police from the area that they are policing, so that way they are protecting their own environment.
Well, it's critical to us working on that issue of trust. You don't trust someone
on both sides.
Yeah, you don't trust someone you don't know, you've never seen before, maybe don't understand how they operate or how they move.
Yep.
That creates tension right there.
Yep.
And the other thing too is we have to. It's not only like the lack of trust. There's also kind of an element of fear that's in there. And it's hard to trust someone when you're afraid.
Yep.
And so it's critical that we try to understand each other. But part of it is we have to properly incentivize the police. What makes a good police officer? If you're the chief of police, if the only thing you care about, and I'm not saying this is the way it is, but if the only thing you care about is how many arrests did you make, that means you're a good police officer. That's not what we need in a lot of areas.
Right.
We don't need that person who's pulling everybody over. What we need is someone who's going to listen, who's going to try to develop relationships, who's going to try to say, hey, I saw this happened. Is there anything I can do to help? Do you have any information you'd like to share? That's what that makes a good officer. And so part of it is how can we incentivize the good behavior and the appropriate behavior? But it's not also about incentives. It's also penalizing bad behavior. You know, if we look at people and we say, hey, you pulled over 100 cars and 95 of them were driven by African Americans, that's a problem.
Right.
And so how do we punish bad behavior when it takes place as well? And so I think we have to get the proper incentives in place, and we also have to have the proper metrics in place to be able to say that behavior doesn't necessarily comport with the direction that we're trying to go. And then you can tell the community, we've talked to you. You've said this is what makes a good officer, this is what makes a bad officer, this is what we'd like to see, this is maybe what we wouldn't like to see, and then this is how we're going to be able to implement it. But here are the objective things that we're going to look at to see if we're making sure that we are up to the standards that the community has set for us.
In your position, do you want to see your job become easier because there's less crime?
Oh my gosh, I'd love it. I'd love it. You deal with people on their worst day. The victim and the defendant, both of them. That's usually a snapshot into a terrible moment that everybody wishes they could take back.
Yep.
And so you'd love to not have to go through that and deal with that. And so, and for us too, like how can we eliminate the repeat business? Like we don't want to see people again.
Yeah.
And we want to make sure that if someone has a connection or a nexus to the criminal justice system, that it was an experience where they will say to themselves, I don't want to be here again.
Yeah. What is your relationship? Because you explained very well about what you expect from law enforcement and how they police. But what is your relationship as prosecutor with law enforcement?
It's evolving. They don't always like what I have to say. Yeah. And they don't necessarily always.
Because it didn't sound like something they would like to hear what you just said. Like, I don't think they would like that.
Yeah. I mean, it's hopefully their perspective will evolve with not only me, but the community as a whole.
Right.
And so sometimes there is that level of tension. We're in a position where I think it's incredibly important that we're independent and that we are in a position to say to law enforcement, we don't think what you've done is good enough.
Yeah.
Or what you did is criminal and we're going to have to charge you.
Right.
And that creates tension at times. But I think if you're fortunate enough to be in a position like prosecutor, you have to be willing to address those issues because if you don't, there's no way the community can move forward. We talk about issues of trust. One of the biggest things I hear as to why people think there's mistrust is, well, police officers are held to one standard and the rest of us are held to another.
Yeah.
And so in order for us to, if we're serious about dealing with the issues of trust, we also have to be serious about saying, how can we help each other get better?
Yeah.
And sometimes that's going to result in some people being charged, and sometimes that's going to result in having tough conversations about someone's conduct. But those are the things that need to take place if we're serious about working on building that trust.
How do you think the conversation starts to where we can build trust with each other, because there has to be some kind of there has to be a meeting of the minds between law enforcement and the community to make these conversations happen, so that we can build trust. Because you can't build trust without a conversation.
Right. And you have to also recognize that there's a problem.
Yeah.
Like, you have to be willing to say this isn't working.
I'll say this too. So in different communities, there are different perspectives of police, right? And the trust is built where the relationships are great.
Right.
Like in certain communities in this state, the relationship between police and the community are great. And both sides trust each other, and the crime is probably less.
100%.
But the perspective is different also between the two. So how do we change that?
Well, I think a lot of it goes back to kind of our earlier conversation is, number one, we have to acknowledge that mistakes have been made. Yeah. And number two, we also have to make sure that our police force looks like our community. Yep. And it would also help if our police lived in our town.
Yeah.
You know,
we just talked about that.
Right. Yeah,
that's important.
It's 100% important. You know, it's a lot more difficult to vilify someone when your kids go to school together. Yep. When I see you at the restaurant, when we shop for groceries at the same place, when we go to the same church.
Yep. You're going to find reasons to help that person.
Yeah. And you're also going to find not a bad guy.
Correct.
You know, maybe we don't agree on everything, but all in all, he's not a bad guy. I saw him with his kids the other day. He's all right.
Yep.
And so I think that's part of it too, is, do the people here reflect our community who are serving in law enforcement? Do they live in our community? Mm-hmm. Meaning, are they a part of what we are doing?
Yep.
And then, you know, recognizing, hey, there are issues. And then I think there has to be, you know, that back and forth of saying, okay, we're not going to change all of this overnight. We're not going to solve 200 years worth of problems today. What can we do right here, right now, when we walk out of here that can make things just a little bit better?
Yep.
And we're going to hold each other accountable to say, if we do those things, we are moving the needle forward. But, you know, we have to be able to agree on what those things are. And then let's make sure we're holding one another accountable to say, oh, it's not just lip service. I mean, it's easy. The easiest thing in the world to do is to say something.
Yep.
The bigger question is, are you going to devote the time, energy, and resources to make sure that you can follow through and make sure that occurs?
Yep. One thing, and I'm gonna be on the side of police officers everywhere, is I think that they need to incentivize policing so much that it's a job that they don't want to lose. And if you do that, then they'll take more pride in their job. I think if you paid police way more than you pay them now, and you make it harder for them to be police officers, then they take more pride in their job. They don't want to lose it. I say give them anything they want, almost, to the point to where it's a very prestigious job.
And a lucrative job.
And a lucrative job. Yeah. Something that you don't want to lose. And then they'll wake up every morning with a different mindset, I feel.
It's a lot easier to change priorities when people are financially motivated.
Yes.
And there's a lot of people out there, whether, I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing, but they're motivated by the dollar.
Right.
And you're exactly right. If you're like, wow, I'm not trying to lose this 6-figure job over, you know, doing this Mickey Mouse stuff I've been doing.
Yep.
Guess what? They're going to cut out the BS and say,
but they're also going to be willing to take more. Like, they'll be able, they're more pliable if they're not willing to lose a job. Because I think there's a lot of clapback from officers when they feel a certain type of way. They're like, I mean, I'm not going to do that. Like, why would I do that? You're not paying me enough to change my mind or change my mentality. Like, nah. But if you are like, you're going to lose this job, like, how bad do you want it? And they're like, it's not that bad. I can do it for that.
Right. Yeah. No, there's I think there's real value in that.
Yeah.
And it also sends a powerful message to, you know, your budget is always a reflection of your priorities.
Yeah.
And so if that's one of our priorities, then our budget should reflect that.
It should. I'm going to pivot a little bit and ask you, what in you made you want to go into a career of service?
I just wanted to help people.
Yeah.
I feel very fortunate. I had my mom was a school teacher and my dad worked in insurance.
Yep.
My mom loved going to work every day. My dad had a job.
Yep.
And I wanted that feeling of going in and hopefully making a difference and making your community a better place.
Yep.
When I started at the prosecutor's office in 2006, I had very short-term and very small goals of just wanted to improve the community incrementally.
Yep.
Just wanted to be an opportunity to learn how to be a trial attorney, be the guy in the courtroom,
Yep.
But also make the community a better place. And, I think that very much came from my parents and just seeing their two very different experiences with their careers. My dad was in insurance. He didn't love it. My mom was a teacher. She loved every day of it.
Right.
And so that really left a pretty big impact on me as to why I wanted to go into public service.
Nice. When you're long done being the county prosecutor, what do you want your legacy to be?
That I was fair.
Yeah.
That I treated people fairly.
Yep.
I think for too long, people thought a prosecutor, like you should judge your success by how many people you put in jail and however many years people served. I just want people to say that I treated people fairly. That's the biggest thing to me is that we tried to be fair to everyone that we encountered.
That's not a very common answer from someone in your position, because a lot of people just want to win, right? Like they want to say I never lost,
right?
Yeah,
but that hopefully that's not our objective, and hopefully we've moved past that.
Yep.
Like we've got 200 years of experience of tough on crime.
Yep.
It doesn't work.
Yeah.
Like it didn't produce the results people thought that it would.
Right.
And it totally destroyed communities in the process.
Yeah.
I don't know how much time we have, but the war on drugs is a perfect example of prosecutors and police thought, we're doing a great job. We're sending all these people to jail for low-level amounts of drugs. We're making these communities a better place.
Yeah.
And nothing could be further from the truth. And the impact that had on particular areas.
I always said that the war on drugs, I grew up in the crack era, and I always thought that the war on drugs was a war on black people. And I'm not saying just black people, people of color, because of the drugs and what they constituted as breaking the law with these drugs. And it was just like they were putting astronomical numbers of people that I know and grew up with and in my family in jail because they had like this much freaking crack or something.
And ultimately, it didn't benefit the community, and it destroyed trust between law enforcement, the criminal justice system, because people were like, he's not a bad guy.
Right.
He's not the one.
Right. He's not selling it.
Right. But he's got that amount of cocaine.
Yeah.
And, I mean, people are amazed by this, but prior to 2014, if you had a gram of cocaine and you were within 1,000 feet of an apartment complex, a school, a park, any of these areas, you were looking at 20 to 50 years.
A gram.
20 to 50 years.
Wow.
Today, that's a level 6 felony.
Wow.
Like we've gone from, and that was 2014. It's not like it was 100 years ago.
Right.
This was 2014.
That's nuts.
And so we've seen like the impact of these policies. And, now we've got the opioid epidemic and look at how that's been treated.
But listen how it's worded. It's an opioid epidemic.
Well,
it's not a war on opioids.
Well, and let's get to the punchline too. Let's look at who's accused of those crimes.
Right.
Like if you look at who we prosecute for opioids and who those defendants are and the number of treatment programs that are available, the number of resources being offered as compared to what happened with the crack cocaine epidemic or however you want to refer to it. I mean, it's a night and day approach, and there's a lot of people in our community who are sitting there saying, "I wonder what the difference is."
Right, they can't seem to figure it out.
Right, and but again, it goes to that issue of trust.
Yes,
and just another thing that unfortunately can divide us at times.
Yeah, and I don't think that what we're trying to do is say that you want to treat this epidemic like you treated that one. We just want the progression to be the same for everybody.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like it's just it only makes sense. Like you want to be a fair prosecutor, so let's be fair then.
Right.
Like across the board, let's treat everybody who has a problem like we would treat everyone that has a problem.
Doesn't matter what your addiction is.
Yeah.
It's the same.
Yeah, let's fix it.
Right. Let's try to give people the resources to deal with something that's really challenging. The criminal justice system hasn't always done that.
Right. Speaking of drugs, one of the popular things is the legalization of marijuana. And the state of Indiana, to me, as a person who is a transplant, seems like they will never do it. They will never do it. But I mean, they have to be closer with all the states around them legalizing it. And not just marijuana, but like psychedelic drugs. Mm-hmm. I just want to know, because other states are opening the doors to the
Washington passed it.
Yeah, Washington passed it. So what, in your opinion, what are the odds that something like mushrooms, marijuana becomes legal recreationally, like some way?
I'm not optimistic right now.
Right.
You know,
and that's fair.
Yeah, I mean, and it's frustrating because I wish people knew how much it costs to prosecute someone. And I wish people knew not only the amount of damage you do to someone when they are arrested for something, but also just the financial costs associated with it.
Yep.
And think about, we're throwing away all this money over a dime bag of weed.
Yeah.
And, you know, you talk to Republicans and they always talk about being business oriented and all these other things, and government needs to act more like a business. Well, where's the return on investment on that?
Right.
I mean, if you think about the cost of arresting someone, transporting that person to the Marion County jail, getting them assessed, getting them evaluated, making sure you're able to keep them safe, feeding them, dealing with whatever their medical needs are, then they walk out of the jail. Then we got to appoint a public defender, all the judicial resources. People forget, if we get marijuana, we have to send it to a lab. Then we have to have a lab technician test it. And then that person's, spending their time on that. I mean, it's tens of thousands of dollars.
Right.
And for a dime bag of weed.
Yeah.
So at what point in time do you say, okay, this costs $10,000 and we have $10 worth of weed?
Right.
At what point do we just do the math here and say, this is not an efficient or effective use of resources?
Right.
Not to mention the fact, if you look who ends up in the criminal justice system, the people who oftentimes end up getting arrested for possession of marijuana are black and brown people.
Yeah.
It's just a fact. If you look at who uses drugs and who ends up in the criminal justice system, the numbers are clearly disproportionate. Right. So I'm not even talking about the human toll,
right?
But just the financial cost. And you make these arguments to Indiana legislators, and they're like, no way, no how. We're very much against the legalization of marijuana.
I mean, I just think it's insane. Only because, I mean, it's not insane. I get it. It's a political thing. But when you think about the harm and the toll, the death tolls of, let's say, alcohol and marijuana, all those things, and all the laws that are passed to make alcohol legal and the things that we can do with that, but you are so against marijuana when I know a lot of the people that are fighting against it are doing it.
Right.
I know, like a lot of the people who are against marijuana do marijuana. One thing, like we were talking about policing, and I forgot to mention this, but I want your advice and I want your help, because I want to change the perspective of policing in the community. I want to do something to make it where people who look like me, who are children, want to grow up and be police officers. Because I grew up I live in a community where children want to be cops. The children don't look like me, but they want to be cops because they respect them. They're not scared of them. And I think that there's a way that we can bridge the gap with the inner city and law enforcement. And I just want to know if there's a way that we could work together to figure out something to make that happen.
Well, number one, if you look, there's a shortage of police officers. Mm-hmm. So we need to be looking everywhere to find individuals who want to become police. But I think it goes back to kind of that idea of intentional recruitment in terms of making that job cool again.
Yeah.
Again, if it's your brother, it's your sister, it's your cousin who goes into law enforcement, I mean, how do most people get a job? Through somebody they know.
Correct.
You know? And so if we can break through that initial barrier or resistance to get people more engaged and more willing to consider that career, I really do feel like the flood dams are going to open up. But to your point, we have to make that initial effort to encourage that, and not only can encourage it, but celebrate it. Like, oh, wow, that's incredible. And so I think it's a lot about intentional recruitment and providing the proper incentives, which includes financial, but also celebrating individuals who want to pursue or go down that path, in particular, people who are locally born and raised.
Right. Dear police officers, I hope that they decide to give your children free education. I think that would be a great incentive for police officers. I am an advocate for police, like a huge advocate for police. I just don't like how they treat us. That's just my thing. But on a normal day, you're not prosecutor. What is it that you like to do?
Well, I'm a huge sports fan. And so spend a lot of times playing either I'll play, basketball or try to work out. And then
where you play at?
Well, it depends. Depends on how good I'm feeling. But appreciate the YMCA over there at 38th and Keystone. We've done a couple of things up there with those kids, hooping with them. We also have our basketball camp every year. Maybe we can get you out there. You look like you can play a little bit.
I can do a little bit.
Yeah. But also, I've got an 8 and a 6-year-old, so trying to figure out how to, be involved with them and participate with them. My 8-year-old is obsessed with sports, and so whether it's throwing the football, the baseball, or shooting hoops, we try to do that as much as possible. And then also, try to love reading and learning about other people. I'm a big nonfiction guy, in particular biographies, and so. Spend a lot of time also doing that.
I read a lot of biographies as well. You know who's the Fox guy? I read a couple of his books. Killing.
Oh yeah,
Reagan.
Bill O'Reilly.
Bill O'Reilly. His Killing series is really good. And people might not know that, but if you read his books, they're very non-biased. They're very honest. Very good.
I'll take your word for it. It's hard for me to give that guy money.
Killing
but we'll
Ronald
see.
Reagan, that's a good one. I read that one. And Lincoln.
Yeah, Killing Lincoln and Kennedy. I know
Lincoln is good too. Those are good. I always ask all my guests how they define success. So how would you define success?
Finding things better. If you, especially if you're in a position of leadership, have you been able to improve things? That to me is success. There's all these different environmental factors that are constantly working against you. But if you're fortunate enough to be in a position of leadership, how can you make things better? For me is success. I think the other part of success too is trying really, really hard. And, I know I mentioned my kids a lot, but I just had this conversation with my 8-year-old is you work really hard and you try really hard, not because it's going to guarantee you a victory. It's to give yourself an opportunity to win. And that to me is really important, is putting yourself in that position to give you that chance. It doesn't mean it's always going to work out for you. Everybody misses shots. Everybody loses games. But you put in that energy and you put in that effort to give yourself a chance to maybe come down with a victory. And so for me, it's also about the process of making sure, did we do the process to give ourselves that chance at victory?
Nice. I like that answer.
Yeah.
There's a big election coming up soon.
Yeah, presidential.
And the one thing about Indiana that just amazes me is how they are always first to disappoint me.
601.
They always seem to disappoint me. And one of the biggest things that they did recently was the ban on abortion, right? I am a man, and I have opinions about it, but I always just think that this is an issue that women have the best perspective by far.
You mean you don't know better for everybody else?
Yeah, I don't. Of course I have ideas and I have perspectives and I have opinions about it. But to me, for us to make laws that tells a certain gender that they can't do something because we don't feel it's right because something told us it wasn't, I don't understand why we can't help women to be able to make their own choice.
I mean, when you put it like that, it sounds so basic.
It's so basic.
It's just.
And I don't even have to be pro-abortion. I mean, I don't have to say that I don't want abortion. I can be against abortions to be pro-choice.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't understand why people don't understand that. Like, just because abortions are out there doesn't mean that you have to have one.
Right.
And I don't understand the mentality between someone that says they shouldn't even exist.
Not only that, but for me, being the prosecutor, they've criminalized it.
Yeah, which is even crazier. Like that just adds more to your table.
Right. It's like,
are your hands tied behind your back with this? Like, do you have?
Well, I've been very open and said we're not going to prosecute doctors and nurses.
Okay.
To me, that's not why I became a prosecutor.
Right.
I became a prosecutor to help people.
Yeah.
I became a prosecutor because I wanted to make a difference in my community.
Well, that opinion does, though.
Yeah,
to me.
But to prosecute a doctor,
yeah.
I mean, for doing their job,
that's crazy.
That's not why I became a prosecutor.
Right.
And so when they pass that type of legislation, I think it's important for people like me to stand up and say that is not a priority of our office.
Okay. I don't really have much. You really just blew my mind with all your responses. Like,
even the Jordan response.
Hey, Jordan GOAT for me.
Okay, there we go. Good. I was worried about you there for a second.
He's the GOAT for me, but I'm a Laker fan, and I've always been a LeBron fan. And I also just think it's eras. It's eras.
Right. So
like Jordan is not he's not a part of this era. So right. I can't put him with LeBron. So that's that.
Okay. But I was going to make a comment about LeBron flopping, but I'll let it go. I mean, it's a new era.
Yeah, they didn't flop much in Jordan's era.
No,
they whooped ass.
That's what I mean. We need to bring back Charles Oakley. Yeah, we need to bring back that era where if you did flop, they're like, okay, next time down, I'm going to give you a reason you're going to be on the ground.
Right. I'm with it.
Takes care of a lot of that.
Yeah, I am. I just want to say I want to thank you for coming. I want to thank you for your candor. I want to thank you for your perspective, and I want to thank you for doing what you do.
Well, thank you. I enjoyed the conversation, and hopefully we can do it again sometime.
I hope so. I just want to invite you to things that I do out there, and hopefully you'll show up and show your face and gain some more constituents.
Yeah,
some more supporters.
Yeah. I live right down the street, so let me know.
There you go. There you go. Thank you, everybody, for listening. I want to thank Ryan Mears for coming out. Go to followdmoney.com. Check out everything on there, and we'll see you next time.